So, have you ever thought about this? What if the burning desire to fight for social justice and the deep personal need for faith aren't really two different things? What if they're just two ends of the same road? Well, today we're going to unpack a really powerful argument from a sermon given way back in 1933 by Harry Emerson Fosdick, and he makes exactly that case. It's a journey that starts with his passion to change the world, and you'll see it ends up somewhere you might not expect. And this, right here, is Fosdick's whole idea in a nutshell. It's such a great metaphor. For a long time, he argued people saw this as a one-way street. You get personal religion, and that inspires you to go out and do good in the world. But he said, hang on, no, it's a two-way tunnel. You can absolutely start with that fire in your belly for social reform, and if you really follow that path all the way to the end, you'll find yourself arriving at a deep personal faith. So let's actually take that journey together. We're going to walk the path that Fosdick lays out for this idealistic social reformer, starting right where all incredible change really begins. All right, first stop, the individual. Fosdick's first big point is that every major social movement, every push for a better world, it doesn't kick off in some big committee meeting or at a protest. Nope. It starts with a single person's conscience being pricked, being awakened. And he's got this fantastic analogy for it. He says thinking that big social change just appears out of thin air is like looking at the huge Hudson River and just ignoring where it comes from. The Hudson doesn't just pop into existence as this massive body of water. It starts, as he puts it, in multitudinous individual springs far up among the mountains, obscure, small, insignificant. And social movements, he says, are just like that. They're fed by all these little individual springs of conscience. And he doesn't just say it, he backs it up with history. And what's so cool here is how he connects these massive, world-changing reforms back to real people. Prison reform, you can trace it back to John Howard and Elizabeth Fry. How we care for the mentally ill today, that started with a Quaker named William Tuke. And for Fosdick, these weren't just nice people. He believed their consciences were, and this is his phrase, made sensitive by a high religion. So this is the first big landmark on our journey. It's this realization that you can't just fix the world's broken systems on the outside without dealing with where they come from. The attitudes, the fears, the beliefs inside individual human souls. The two are completely fundamentally linked. Okay, so let's move on to the next leg of this journey. Our young, idealistic reformer is totally fired up, their conscience is wide awake, but now that passion is about to run smack into the brick wall of the real world. And this, right here, this is the great test. This is the question, isn't it? It's the one Fosdick says every single person who wants to change things for the better has to answer. What keeps you going? When the progress is just painfully slow, when the opposition is loud and fierce, and when that initial excitement just wears off, what stops you from getting cynical and just walking away? And this slide just lays out that conflict so perfectly. When we're young, we live on the word ought. The world ought to be fair. We ought to have peace. But then, as the years pile on, we keep running into the word is. The world is often deeply unfair. War is everywhere. Fosdick says one of the saddest things to see is the wreckage of a youthful ought on that terrific is. He says starting a cause is like launching a ship. It's this big party with flags flying and everyone cheering. But the real test isn't the launch party. It's the voyage. It's getting through those brutal, long storms and the endless, soul-crushing delays. He argues that your initial enthusiasm, well, it's just not enough fuel for a trip this long and this hard. So what's the answer? What gets you through the storm? Well, for Fosdick, the only thing that works is a deep, patient faith. A belief that a better world isn't just some fairy tale we've cooked up, a world that ought to be, but that it's actually in line with the very fabric of reality, with what truly is. It's this powerful conviction that the universe isn't just cold and indifferent, but that it's actually on the side of justice. And that leads us to the final and maybe the most difficult part of this path. If you really want to change the world on the outside, Fosdick argues you have to first win a massive victory on the inside.
I mean, it's a simple idea, right? You can't give what you don't have. You can't go out and inspire spiritual courage in a society if you've lost your own. You can't sell a vision for a better world if you've become just as cynical and broken down as the world you're trying to fix. You have to find a place to stand, spiritually, that's higher than the mess you're trying to clean up.
And his prime example is Gandhi. Just think about it. Gandhi's fight against the injustice of the caste system was so powerful because he had already won that battle inside his own soul. He had, in his own heart and mind, completely and totally risen above the very prejudice he was fighting out in the world. And that inner victory is what gave his actions on the outside their incredible moral power. Fosdick wraps this all up with a perfect analogy of a stage play. He says that far too many reformers only focus on shifting the scenery, changing the laws, tweaking the institutions, rearranging the furniture on the stage. And look, that work is important, but it's not enough. The play itself, he says, will never get any better unless you also change the actors, the inner lives, the spirits, the very character of the human beings on the stage. Okay, so let's put all the pieces together. We've been following our idealistic reformer on this whole journey. They started with that little spark of conscience, they got tested by the harshness of reality, and they learned that they had to win a victory inside themselves first. We've finally made it to the other side of the tunnel. So this is what our reformer has learned is absolutely essential. Lasting change needs the spark of a sensitized individual conscience. It needs the fuel of a deep and patient faith to keep going. And it needs the power of an inner victory to rise above it all. For Fosdick, these aren't just nice-to-haves. They are the non-negotiable building blocks for any real, lasting change. And here it is. This is the big reveal, the destination. The path that started with just a desire for social reform, to end a war or fix an unjust system, has led straight to the very definition of a living personal faith, a conscience that feels the world's pain, a sustaining belief in a moral universe, and an inner spiritual life that can overcome the world's problems. That, Fosdick says, is religion. We started in New Jersey, and we've walked right through the tunnel and ended up in New York. And so we end with the one huge question that his whole argument leaves you with. And it's a challenge that feels just as urgent today as it did back in 1933. Forget about shifting the scenery for just a second. Can we ever really, truly build a better world if we don't first do the hard, messy, deep work of building better people? It's a question worth wrestling with.